Judicial control of administrative discretion is divided into two categories. One is abuse of discretion, and the second one, failure to exercise discretion. So, abuse of discretion means the discretionary power is required to be exercised according to law. When the mode of exercising a valid power is improper or unreasonable, it is an abuse of power, and that abuse of power is falls under one is use of improper purposes. So, in a decided case, we'll discuss about the use of improper purpose. So, that is the leading case, Hukum Chand versus Union of India in 1976, decided by the Supreme Court. So, regarding the use for improper purposes, the discretionary power is required to be used for the purpose for which it has been given. If it is given for one purpose and used for another purpose, it will amount to abuse of power. And as it was decided in the leading case, Hukum Chand versus Union of India in 1976, the petitioner's telephone was disconnected by the general manager of telephone on the ground that it was used for illegal purposes. Under the rules, the power of disconnection was to be exercised by the divisional manager in the event of emergency. The court held that the act as abuse of power, though therefore it is invalid. So also abuse of power can be found by Malafide or bad faith, as it was decided in Pratap Singh versus State of Punjab in 1964 by the Supreme Court. So also in State of Punjab versus Gurdel Singh in 1980 by the Supreme Court, and also Express Newspaper Limited versus Union of India in 1986 by the Supreme Court. So, if the discretionary power is exercised by the authority with bad faith or dishonest intention, the action is quashed by the court. Malafide exercise of discretionary power is always bad and taken as abuse of discretion. So, in the instance case, the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that the power was exercised Malafide and squashed the order of the government, as it was in the case of Pratap Singh versus State of Punjab, and in State of Punjab versus Gurdel Singh in 1980, the Supreme Court held that the petitioner challenged the land acquisition proceedings for acquiring his land for Mandi on the ground that the proceedings were started at the behest of a minister to satisfy his personal vendetta against the petitioner. the court accepted his contention and quashed the proceedings on the ground of Malafide, and in the same way, in Express Newspapers Limited versus Union of India in 1986, the Supreme Court held that the central government notice of re-entry upon the forfeiture of lease under the Delhi Municipal Corporation Act 1957 was held to be invalid on the ground of Malafide, as it was issued to silence the newspaper and was politically motivated. And another ground of abuse of power is irrelevant consideration, and in that case we will discuss the leading case Brij Mohan versus State of Punjab in 1983, and the case was decided by the Supreme Court. The decision of the administrative authority is declared void if it is not based on relevant and genuine consideration. The consideration will be irrelevant if there is no reasonable connection between the facts and the grounds. The discretionary power conferred on the authority is required to be exercised on the considerations stated in the statute, and therefore if the authority taken into account any matter unconnected or irrelevant to those stated in the statute, it is taken abuse of discretionary power, and the action is declared to be invalid and void. So in Brij Mohan versus State of Punjab in 1983, it was held a government servant was compulsorily retired from service on the basis of the service reports for a period of 20 years, while the government required to consider the service reports for a period of 10 years only. The order of compulsory retirement was held to be invalid on the ground that government took into account some irrelevant consideration. And the next one was leaving out relevant consideration, as it was decided in Rampur Distilleries versus Company Law Board in 1970 by the Supreme Court. The administrative authority exercising the discretionary power is required to take into account all the relevant facts. If it leaves due relevant consideration, its actions will be invalid. So, in Rampur Distillery versus Company Law Board, the Company Law Board refused to approve the renewal of the managing agency on the ground that the managing director of the agency was guilty of misconduct. In 1946-47, the refusal was declared invalid on the ground that the board did not take into account the present activities of the director. The Supreme Court held that the misconduct of the managing director was no doubt relevant consideration, but the present activities of the director was no doubt relevant, should be taken as relevant consideration. Leaving out the present activities of the director was taken as leaving out the relevant consideration, Therefore, the action of the board was declared invalid. So also, in another case, that is the ground under which it would be considered abuse of power, abuse of discretionary power is unreasonableness, and in connection to that, we will discuss the leading case Menka Gandhi versus Union of India in 1978. The Supreme Court so regarding that discretionary power is required to be exercised by the authority reasonably. If it is exercised unreasonably, it will be declared invalid by the court. Every authority is required to exercise its power reasonably. So, in Menka Gandhi versus Union of India, the Supreme Court held that Article 14 of the Constitution guarantees equality before law and equal protection of law. However, reasonable clarification has been permitted if the clarification does not rest upon the reasonable grounds of distinction. The action will be taken as arbitrary and against Article 14. So, another ground of abuse of discretionary power is colorable exercise of power. So, where the discretionary power is exercised by the authority on which it has been conferred, ostensibly for the purpose for which it has been given, but in reality for some other purpose, it is taken as colorable exercise of the discretionary power and it is declared invalid. And another ground of abuse of discretionary power is non-compliance with the procedural requirements. So, regarding that, if the procedural requirements laid down in the statute is mandatory and it is not complied, the exercise of power will be bad. Whether the procedure requirement is mandatory or directory is decided by the court. And another one is exceeding jurisdiction, which is also a ground found for abuse of discretionary power. So, the authority required to exercise the power within the limits or the statute. Consequently, if the authority exceeds this limit, its actions will be held to be ultra virus and therefore void. For example, if an authority has been given power to award a claim for the medical aid of the employees, granting the said benefit to the family members of the employees will amount to exceeding the power. So, these are the different grounds we found under abuse of discretionary power and how these are being under judicial control, which falls under abuse of discretion. And in our upcoming video, we'll discuss another part of that judicial control of administrative discretion, and that is failure to exercise discretion.